For 15 years, Tony Castellano had wondered if his father ever regretted choosing business empire over family love. Robert Castellano Sr. had built a construction fortune, but lost his son when he demanded Tony abandon his passion for auto repair and join the corporate world. Now, as Tony worked under the hood of an expensive Ferrari, he stared at a family photo on the dashboard, a picture of happier times before money and pride tore them apart forever. The morning rain drummed against the windows of Castellano's auto repair as Tony wiped his hands on an oil-stained rag and surveyed the day's work ahead. At 35, he had been running his own garage for 8 years, building a reputation for honest work and fair prices in a neighborhood where most people drove practical cars that needed practical fixes. It wasn't the glamorous life his father had envisioned for him, but it was honest work that he loved. The garage was small but well-organized, with 2 hydraulic lifts and enough space for 4 cars. Tony employed 2 other mechanics, Miguel, who specialized in transmissions, and Danny, a young apprentice who reminded Tony of himself at that age, eager to learn and unafraid of getting his hands dirty. Together, they served the working-class community of East Boston, keeping aging vehicles running for families who couldn't afford new cars or dealership prices. Tony had inherited more than just his father's name. He had the same mechanical intuition, the ability to diagnose engine problems by sound alone, and the stubborn pride that had ultimately driven them apart. But while Robert Castellano Sr. had channeled that pride into building a construction empire worth millions, Tony had poured his into becoming one of the most respected independent mechanics in the city. The red Ferrari 488 that pulled into his garage at 10 a.m. was unlike anything that had ever darkened his doorway. The car was worth more than Tony's entire shop, its pristine paint job and perfect lines marking it as the toy of someone with serious wealth. Tony watched through the window as the driver's door opened and a man in an expensive suit emerged, looking distinctly uncomfortable in the blue-collar surroundings. The customer was well-dressed but older, maybe in his 60s, with silver hair and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to being in charge. He approached Tony cautiously, as if unsure of his welcome. "Are you Tony Castellano?" the man asked. "That's me. What can I do for you?" "I'm having engine problems with the Ferrari. It's making a strange noise, and the dealership is booked for 3 weeks. I heard you were the best independent mechanic in the city." Tony nodded, though he was surprised. Ferrari owners usually insisted on dealership service, and word-of-mouth referrals rarely crossed the economic lines that separated his neighborhood from wherever this car normally lived. "What kind of noise?" "A clicking sound when I accelerate. Start around 3,000 RPM. Could be several things. Let me take a look." The man handed over the keys with what seemed like reluctance. "I'll wait inside if that's okay. There's a coffee shop across the street where I can make some calls." "Sure thing. I'll call you when I know what we're dealing with." As the customer walked away, Tony noticed he moved with a slight limp, favoring his left leg in a way that seemed familiar, but that Tony couldn't quite place. Tony drove the Ferrari into the garage and positioned it under the hydraulic lift. The car was immaculate inside and out, clearly maintained by someone who spared no expense. As he popped the hood to begin his diagnosis, something on the dashboard caught his eye. A small framed photograph was positioned near the speedometer, held in place by what looked like a custom mounting bracket. Tony leaned closer to get a better look, and his world tilted on its axis. The photo showed a family of 4 standing in front of a Christmas tree. A man in his 40s wearing an expensive sweater, a woman with kind eyes and graying hair, a teenage boy with grease already under his fingernails despite the formal occasion, and a young girl with pigtails and a gap-toothed smile. Tony remembered the day clearly. Christmas 2008, the last Christmas they'd all spent together before everything fell apart. He was looking at a picture of his own family. Tony's hands began shaking as he stared at the photograph. There was his father, Robert Castellano Sr., looking successful and proud. His mother, Angela, who had died of cancer 3 years after this photo was taken. His little sister Maria, who would have been 12 in this picture. And there was Tony himself at 20, already passionate about cars, but not yet aware that his passion would cost him his family. The photograph had been carefully preserved behind glass, positioned where the driver would see it every time he got in the car. Someone had kept this picture for 15 years, had treasured it enough to display it in their most prized possession. Tony stepped back from the car, his mind reeling. The customer's name on the work order was listed as R. Castellano, but Tony had assumed it was coincidence. Castellano wasn't an uncommon Italian name in Boston. Now he realized the truth that his heart had been trying to tell him from the moment the man walked into his shop. The customer was his father. Robert Castellano Sr. had brought his Ferrari to his estranged son's garage, carrying a picture of their family from happier times. The question was why, after 15 years of silence and pride. Tony sat down heavily on a work stool, staring at the photograph and remembering the day their relationship had died. He'd been 20 years old, fresh out of technical college with dreams of opening his own garage. Robert had just landed a major government contract for his construction company and was riding high on success and ambition. "You're throwing your life away," Robert had said during what would be their final argument. "I'm offering you a path to real success, real money, real respect. You could run this company someday. But instead, you want to fix cars like some common mechanic." "There's nothing common about being a good mechanic," Tony had replied. "And there's nothing wrong with working with your hands. Don't be naive, Anthony. You think customers respect mechanics? You think women want to marry men who smell like motor oil? You think you can build a family, a legacy, on minimum wage and dirty fingernails? I think I can build a life doing something I love instead of something that makes me miserable. Love doesn't pay bills. Passion doesn't build security. You're 20 years old and you think you know everything, but you don't understand how the world works. I understand that you'd rather I be miserable in a suit than happy in coveralls." That's when Robert had delivered his ultimatum. "Fine. If you want to waste your life in a garage, that's your choice. But don't expect me to watch you do it. And don't expect me to leave my business to someone who thinks small." Tony had chosen the garage. Robert had chosen his pride. Neither had spoken to the other since. The years that followed had been difficult for both of them in different ways. Tony had struggled to establish his business, working 18-hour days and eating ramen noodles while he built his reputation. Robert's construction company had continued to grow, but he'd lost his wife to cancer and watched his daughter grow up with questions about why her big brother never came to family gatherings anymore. Tony had heard about his mother's illness through mutual friends, but pride, the same stubborn Castellano pride that had driven them apart, had kept him from reaching out. By the time he swallowed that pride and tried to visit, Angela was too sick to see anyone, and Robert had made it clear that Tony wasn't welcome at the hospital. The funeral had been the worst day of Tony's life. He'd stood in the back of the church, watching his father and sister grieve while he remained isolated by 15 years of silence and stubbornness. After the service, Maria had approached him with tears in her eyes. "She asked about you," Maria had said. "Every day, she asked about you. She wanted to see you, but Dad said—" "What did Dad say?" "That you'd made your choice." Tony had tried to approach his father at the cemetery, but Robert had turned away without a word. That was the last time they'd been in the same place. Now, staring at the family photo in his father's Ferrari, Tony wondered if Robert regretted that choice as much as he did. The clicking noise in the engine turned out to be a relatively simple fix, a loose heat shield that had worked itself free and was rattling against the exhaust manifold. 30 minutes of work and a $20 part. But Tony took his time with the diagnosis, trying to figure out what he was going to say when his father returned. When Robert walked back into the garage 2 hours later, Tony was standing beside the Ferrari with the hood still up, the family photo in his hands. "Is that the problem?" Robert asked, gesturing toward the engine. "The car's fixed," Tony said quietly. "But I think we both know that's not why you're here." Robert's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly. "I didn't know if you'd recognize me. 15 years. You look older. The limp is new. Construction accident 3 years ago. Fell off a scaffold." Robert paused. "I kept thinking I should call you, tell you about your mother, about Maria's wedding, about things, but I didn't know how. So you brought your car here instead. I've been driving past your shop for months, trying to work up the courage to stop. When the engine started making noise, it seemed like a sign." Tony held up the photograph. "You kept this. Your mother made me promise to keep it. She said someday you'd come home, and she wanted to make sure you knew we never stopped being a family, even when we stopped acting like one. She never stopped hoping. Never. Even at the end, she was asking me to call you, to apologize, to fix what I'd broken with my pride. Tony felt tears burning his eyes. Why didn't you? Because I was still too proud to admit I was wrong. Because I'd told myself for 15 years that you'd chosen cars over family. And admitting the truth meant admitting that I'd chosen pride over my son. What's the truth, Dad? Robert's voice broke. The truth is that you were right to follow your passion. The truth is that I was so afraid of you failing that I tried to force you into a life that would have made you miserable. The truth is that I've spent 15 years building an empire that doesn't mean anything without family to share it with. You still have Maria. Maria loves me, but she also resents me for driving you away. She got married last year, and she left your seat empty at the wedding table. She said it was to remind me of what my pride had cost us. Tony looked around his garage, his life's work, his dream realized despite his father's doubts. I'm not rich, Dad. I'm not powerful. I fix cars for working people who can't afford dealership prices. I get dirty, I work with my hands, and I'm happy. I can see that. And I can see that you've built something real here, something that matters. I was wrong to think that success could only look one way. What happens now? Robert looked at the Ferrari, then at his son. I was hoping maybe we could start over. Not as the people we were 15 years ago, but as the men we are now. That's not going to be easy. There's a lot of hurt between us. I know, but your mother made me promise to try, and I've already wasted too much time being too proud to keep that promise. Tony set the photograph down on his workbench and walked over to his father. Up close, he could see the years of regret etched in Robert's face, the weight of carrying pride that had cost him his family. The car's fixed, Tony said. Heat shield was loose. $20 for the part, $150 for labor. Robert reached for his wallet, but Tony stopped him. First repair is free for family, Tony said. But if you want to come back, you pay like everyone else. I don't want your charity, and I don't want special treatment. Fair enough. And Dad, if we're going to try this, we do it honestly. No more ultimatums. No more choosing pride over family. I'm what I am, and this is what I do. Robert looked around the garage with new eyes, seeing not a disappointment, but an accomplishment. You built this yourself? From the ground up. Miguel's been with me for 5 years, Danny for 2. We're not getting rich, but we're doing good work. I'm proud of you, son. I should have said that 15 years ago. It wasn't forgiveness. That would take time. It wasn't a complete reconciliation. Too much had been broken for easy repair. But it was a beginning, standing in a garage that smelled of motor oil and possibility, with a family photo as proof that love could survive even the most stubborn pride. 6 months later, Robert Castellano Sr. surprised his son by becoming one of the garage's best sources of referrals. Word spread through his wealthy social circles that Tony Castellano was honest, skilled, and treated every car, whether it was worth $500,000 or $500,000, with the same professional care. You know what's funny? Tony said to his father during one of their weekly dinners, "You were right about one thing. Love doesn't pay bills. But it turns out that loving your work, doing it with integrity, and treating people fairly does." Robert smiled. Your mother would have loved seeing us together again. She did see it, Tony replied, touching the family photo that now sat on his office desk instead of his father's dashboard. She just had to wait a little longer than she hoped. The Castellano men had learned that pride was a luxury they couldn't afford, and that family was wealth that no amount of money could replace.